Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Steve. I want to begin the podcast today by reading from Matthew chapter 5, verse 10. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Some of you have probably heard the report coming out of Congo, Africa, about an event that happened last month when 70 Christians were herded into a church in North Kivu province and were beheaded. It's a terrible thing, and it's not just a one-time incident of these types of things occurring in that region of the world. As Christians, we need to pray for our persecuted brethren. We need to pray for our fellow Christians around the world who are suffering persecution for their testimony of Jesus Christ. This is a very sobering thing, and not one that a person meditates upon lightly. Because as Christians, we need to consider the cost of serving Jesus Christ and the cost of walking with the Lord. As I said in my previous podcasts, in the churches in the book of Revelation, there were several of those churches, of the 7 churches mentioned, where the Christians attending those churches were under severe persecution and under the threat of being killed because of their Christianity. That persecution exists today in today's world. And because of this, we as Christians here in the Western world need to pray for our fellow brethren in other parts of the world who don't have the freedom that we have. I have actually been to South Kivu province in eastern Congo, and I ministered there several years ago. I have been to many places in Africa, and I have to say, of all the places I visited and ministered in Africa, that particular location was the one place where I really didn't feel confident about my safety and security. I can remember seeing truckloads of United Nations soldiers riding around in the white United Nations vehicles with UN on the side of the door, and soldiers sitting in these vehicles with guns and their blue uniforms. And it just, I guess the way to say it is, the atmosphere gave one the impression that really no one was fully in charge. So we need to pray for the Christians there in that part of the world. A brief history lesson on that region is North and South Kivu are loaded with precious minerals that are used in all of the computer components, computer chips, cell phones, video games, and so forth. Some of the minerals that are mined in that region are cassiterite, coltan, tourmaline, tin, tungsten, tantalum, and cobalt. These are all considered precious metals, and they're being used in, like I said, computers, cell phones, video games, and now in electric cars to make the batteries and components for electric cars. So there is a high and ever increasing demand for these precious metals. So seeing that these metals exist in Eastern Congo, one has to understand that there are many people coming to get these metals. And so who is controlling the mining operations that are being conducted to get these metals out of the ground in Eastern Congo? If there is really no formal government control of that region to speak of, then one can only imagine what's going on when it comes to people paying big money for these precious metals and the extraction and mining operations in that region to get them. A lot of labor abuse is going on, and it's hidden. It's hidden because these minerals are transported out of that region and they go through another country, just like the diamond trade, and the accountability of where exactly they come from and how they get to where they're going is lost. And that's by design. A very good book to read concerning Congo and what's going on there is this book that I highly recommend. It describes the history of Congo. It describes the mineral trade. It describes the governmental situation or lack of government in that region of the world. It's a very good book, very well written, and it gives the reader an understanding of what's going on in that part of the world. One of the factors to consider is in the 1930s, Belgium, that was the colonizing power in control of that region at that time, was importing thousands of Rwandans into North Kivu to do farm work and to run the farms. Then, over time, those thousands and thousands of Rwandans stayed in North Kivu. And so over time, after generations, they essentially become permanent residents of that area, but yet they're Rwandans. And it goes back even further than that. There is a book written by a writer named Joseph Conrad, and it's called Heart of Darkness. Heart of Darkness is a story about a steamboat captain back in the 1890s who was running transport up and down the Congo River. At that time, there was a king in Belgium named King Leopold. King Leopold II. And he was ruthless in his dealings with the Congolese and that region of the world. And it just so happened around the 1890 period, the industrial world discovered the use of rubber tires. And then the industrial West developed an insatiable appetite for rubber. And it just so happened that northeastern Congo had rubber vines growing in the forests, and King Leopold saw the opportunity to harvest rubber, and that is where some of the greatest atrocities in the history of mankind occurred, in the enslavement of the Congolese to harvest the rubber from these forests. A very, very good book describing all of this history about Congo is this book titled King Leopold's Ghost. I highly recommend this book. It is an easy read. It's very historical. It even has pictures. So I have to warn you, this book is not for the faint of heart. I want to read to you from page 159 in this book, and these statements give you some understanding of the history of what happened and how it explains what is now happening in Eastern Congo. Page 159, suddenly, this is talking about the discovery of the use of rubber. Suddenly, factories could not get enough of the magical commodity, and its price rose throughout the 1890s. Nowhere did the boom have a more drastic impact on people's lives than in the equatorial rainforest, where wild rubber vines snaked high into the trees that covered nearly half of King Leopold's Congo. The competition Leopold worried about was from cultivated rubber, which comes not from a vine but a tree. Rubber trees, however, require much care and some years before they grow large enough to be tapped. The king voraciously demanded ever greater quantities of wild rubber from the Congo because he knew that the price would drop once plantations of rubber trees in Latin America and Asia reached maturity. So you can see the quest for wealth was a huge part of what was going on at that time in the 1890s in northeastern Congo. So there are two other players primarily in this story about the history of that region. One is a Belgian officer named Leon Rom. He was a ruthless, immoral, demonic person. The story about him goes that he liked to decorate his garden with the heads of slaves. Considering him and this history, if you have ever seen the movie Apocalypse Now, this movie uses many of the themes concerning Officer Leon Rom and what was going on in the Congo. A third person who was highly involved in all of this was a British explorer named Henry Morton Stanley. He is the one who explored the Congo River for King Leopold. And so that's a very brief history and summary of what's going on. Again, I think as Christians here in the West, we need to understand this history. We need to show appreciation for the struggle and the persecution of other Christians in other parts of the world, and we need to pray for them. And that's one of the reasons I made this video, because having been to South Kivu and ministered there myself, I feel very strongly about the Christians here in America and in the Western world to understand what's going on and to pray for these fellow Christians. So again, I encourage you to offer up a prayer to God that they might be strengthened and that God would impart unto these Christians in that part of the world faith, hope, and courage.